Chapter 1, The Beginning. I was always the hopeless romantic, the kind of girl who believed in fairy tales. As a child, I would sit by the window and watch the couples walk hand in hand, wondering if there was someone out there who could love me the way I imagined it would happen. My heart was full of hope, of dreams I had yet to live, of stories that had not yet been written. Then, there was him. Thomas. I met him when I was 21. He was everything I ever wanted, the one who made my heart beat faster and my mind spin with possibilities. He had the eyes of a poet, deep, soulful, and full of wonder. His smile could light up a room, and his touch was electric. I never believed in love at first sight until I met him. He was my first everything, my first kiss, my first love, and my first husband. We married after a whirlwind romance that lasted only 6 months. Our wedding was like something out of a dream, filled with joy and laughter. We built our life together with a sense of passion and hope that seemed unshakable. We were invincible, or so I thought. It didn't take long, however, for cracks to start forming in our perfect world. Little things at first: he came home late, he seemed distracted, he wasn't as affectionate as he used to be. I remember the first time I asked him if something was wrong. He looked at me with those deep eyes, filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I'm just tired," he said, brushing me off with a smile. But it wasn't just that. Slowly, over time, we began to drift apart. The laughter in our house faded. The passion that once burned between us slowly turned to ash. And one day, when I least expected it, he left. He said it was because he needed space, that we had grown apart, that we were no longer the people we once were. I thought I would die in that moment. The world seemed to stop spinning, and I was left standing alone in the rubble of what had been our life. No one had ever warned me that love could hurt so much, that the person who once promised forever could break their vow so easily. But there I was, married, and then suddenly not. Alone. Chapter 2, The Middle. After Thomas, there were others, each of them offering a different kind of love, each of them promising me something I so desperately needed: security, companionship, passion. I married 8 more times after him, trying to fill the hole he left behind, but none of them ever made me feel the way Thomas had. The second husband was Michael. He was kind, dependable, and gentle. He loved me with a quiet affection that felt safe. But something was missing. He was never spontaneous, never fiery, never the one who would hold me close and whisper sweet words into my ear. His love was the kind you could count on, but it wasn't the kind that set your soul on fire. He left after 7 years, claiming that he felt like we were more roommates than lovers. Next came Andrew, who was charming and full of life. He could make me laugh like no one else, and he swept me off my feet with his infectious energy. But as the years wore on, I realized that he was a dreamer, someone who could never truly commit. He loved me in bursts, but the love was always fleeting. When I asked for stability, he couldn't provide it. He left after 3 years, citing our differing life goals. And then there was Samuel. He was the intellectual type: deep conversations, intellectual stimulation, but no true emotional connection. Our marriage was built on respect and admiration, but never on true passion. I couldn't help but compare every moment with him to those I had spent with Thomas, and no matter how hard I tried, Samuel could never live up to the ghost of my first love. After him came Robert, David, Jack, and so on. Some of them I loved, some of them I tried to love, but they were never the one. Each marriage ended in its own way. Each one leaving me feeling a little more hollow, a little more convinced that love, at least for me, was fleeting and impossible to hold on to. But the one who came closest was Julian. Julian was different. He was passionate and intense, like Thomas in many ways. His love for me felt real, almost as though we were soulmates. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of happiness again. But even then, something wasn't quite right. There were too many unsaid things, too many walls between us, and too many nights when he would leave for work and not come back until morning, claiming he had to work late. I never asked, and he never told me. It was with Julian that I realized the truth: none of them would ever love me like Thomas had. Chapter 3, The End. I spent my late 40s alone. I had given up on love entirely. I had learned to live with the memory of my first marriage, the one that had broken me in ways I couldn't explain. After Julian, I couldn't bear to try again. I didn't want to risk it. I didn't want to be hurt anymore. But then, as fate would have it, Thomas returned. It was a chance encounter at a bookstore, of all places. He was standing there, looking at the same book I had been eyeing, and when I looked up, our eyes met. Time seemed to stop for a moment. He hadn't changed much, still handsome, still carrying that same warmth in his eyes. He smiled, and I felt my heart catch in my throat. We talked, awkwardly at first, about nothing important. The weather, our lives since we last saw each other. He was married again, but he spoke of it with a quiet sadness, as if it wasn't the love he had hoped for. I could tell that, in many ways, he was still the man I had married, but life had worn him down. We agreed to meet for coffee, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to one another. But I was wrong. When I saw him again, he told me that his marriage was falling apart, and that he had come to realize that he had never really loved his second wife the way he loved me. His words were familiar, comforting, but they were too little, too late. I had lived a lifetime since we had been together. I had married 9 men, lived through heartache, and learned that love was something fleeting, something fragile. And yet, even as I listened to him speak, I felt no anger, no bitterness. Only sadness, a deep, overwhelming sadness that washed over me. Because as much as I loved him still, I knew that our time had passed. There was no going back. The love we had was gone, and nothing would ever bring it back. He left, and this time, I didn't cry. I didn't feel the need to hold on to him anymore. I had finally learned the truth: love, real love, was a rare and beautiful thing, and once it was gone, it could never be fully recaptured. As I stood in that coffee shop, alone once again, I realized that I had spent my entire life searching for a love that would never come again. And perhaps that was the saddest truth of all. Chapter 4, The Reflection. The days after Thomas's return passed like shadows across my life. It wasn't as though I missed him in the sense of longing to be with him again. No, I had long since learned the hard lesson that you can't go backward in life. But his reappearance stirred something deep inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: the pain of lost time. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking of how I had once been the happiest I'd ever been. I had been young, naive, and convinced that love was all that mattered. But now, looking back, I realized how much I had lost over the years, how much time I had wasted chasing after something I couldn't quite define. Every failed marriage, every heartbreak, every promise that was broken, had chipped away at the idealistic image of love I had once held dear. By the time I reached my mid-50s, I found myself clinging to memories of the past like a lifeline, as if they were the only real thing in a world that had become increasingly unrecognizable. I started to see it clearly: I had been chasing after a feeling I would never find again. Thomas was the first man who had ever loved me fully, and when he left, a part of me had left with him. Every marriage afterward had been a pale imitation of what we had shared, and deep down, I knew that none of them could ever fill that hole in my heart. But there was more to it. I began to understand that my obsession with recreating the past, with finding a love that mirrored my first marriage, had prevented me from truly healing. I had rushed into relationships, hoping each new husband would somehow be the one to fix what was broken inside me. But in doing so, I had only hurt myself further. I had put my hopes and dreams into the hands of men who were never able to give me what I needed, because I didn't know how to give it to myself. There was a sadness in that realization, but there was also a kind of peace. Perhaps love wasn't meant to last forever. Perhaps it was simply meant to be a chapter in our lives, and not the whole story. Perhaps the love I had shared with Thomas was a gift, not a promise, and I had been trying to hold on to something that was never mine to keep. As the months went by, I found myself more content in my solitude. I had become a woman who was no longer defined by her relationships, a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet and look back at her life without regret. I had learned to appreciate the moments of beauty that existed outside of love, the quiet evenings, the friendships, the small victories in my career. I found solace in the world around me, in the things that had nothing to do with romance or heartbreak. But even in my newfound peace, there were times when I would think back to Thomas, to the love we had shared. And in those moments, a tear would slip down my cheek, not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude, for the love that had once been, for the man who had taught me what it meant to truly be loved, and for the lessons I had learned from all the pain. Chapter 5: The Legacy of Love. I eventually moved to a small cottage by the coast. The quiet, isolated life suited me. I had no desire to remarry, no need to search for another person to complete me. My neighbors were kind, and I found joy in the small routines of life, gardening, reading, and spending long afternoons by the sea. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore became my new lullaby, and the scent of salt water and fresh air filled my lungs in a way that made me feel alive. I spent my days in reflection, writing about the things I had learned over the years. The stories of my marriages, the joy and heartache I had endured, poured out onto the pages like a healing balm. In some ways, writing about my past helped me make sense of it all. I began to see that my journey had not been one of failure, but one of growth. I had loved deeply, lost tragically, and survived. That was something to be proud of. Years passed, and eventually, my hair turned silver and my face softened with age. I no longer looked for love, but instead found comfort in the memories of it. Sometimes, I would pull out an old photograph of Thomas and me, the two of us smiling at the wedding that now seemed so distant. I would smile, too, at the memory of those early days, at the way he had held me in his arms and promised to love me forever. And in those moments, I realized something that took me a long time to understand, that love, in its truest form, is not something that lasts forever. But it is something that shapes us, that molds us, and that leaves its mark on us in ways we may not even recognize until much later. The last time I saw Thomas was when he visited my cottage. He was older, graying at the temples, but still carrying that same warmth in his eyes. We sat by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, our conversation easy and familiar, like no time had passed at all. "I've always wondered," he said, looking out at the sea, "if you ever found what you were looking for after all these years." I smiled softly, my heart heavy with the weight of the question. "I did," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "I found peace." He nodded, as though he understood. "I think I've found peace, too." And that was the last time we spoke. Time continued its relentless march, and eventually, I found myself facing the reality of my own mortality. My health began to decline, slowly at first, but then with greater speed. There were days when I felt tired, days when the weight of the years pressed heavily upon me. But even in those moments, I held on to the lessons of my life, the love I had experienced, the loss I had endured, and the peace I had finally found. When my time came, it was not with fear or regret. I had lived a full life, a life that had been shaped by the men I had loved, by the pain I had felt, and by the wisdom I had gained. I had been married 9 times, and while none of those marriages had lasted, none of those men had ever loved me like Thomas did. I had learned to live with that truth. At the end of my life, I was content. I closed my eyes with the knowledge that love, in all its forms, had been the greatest gift I had ever received. Even though it hadn't lasted, even though it had been fleeting, it had been real. And that, in the end, was enough. The story of my 9 husbands and the love I lost, and the peace I finally found, became my legacy, not a tale of regret or failure, but one of love in all its fleeting, imperfect beauty.